3 words, 8 syllables, the most powerful sentence European football's governing body has ever directed at the organization above it. Not FIFA's to sell. Not a complaint about a specific tournament decision, not a response to a VAR controversy or a disciplinary reversal or a phone call confirmed from a government building. Something larger. A formal institutional statement from the governing body of European football declaring that the president of world football's governing institution had crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and that the asset he was attempting to trade does not belong to him. Gianni Infantino's plan to sell stakes in the World Cup, to bring external investors into the ownership structure of football's most commercially significant competition, has produced the most significant institutional rupture in world football governance since the European Super League proposal collapsed in 48 hours in April 2021. That rupture also involved UEFA. That rupture also involved the question of who owns football and who has the right to determine its future. And that rupture also ended with the European football community saying, no, this is not yours to decide. UEFA's statement did not hedge. It did not use diplomatic language. It did not acknowledge the commercial logic of the proposal before raising concerns. It said this crosses a line that football's governing institutions should never cross. It said the soul and governance of football are not assets to trade. It said none of us are the owners of football. And then, in 4 words that will follow Infantino into every governance conversation for the remainder of his presidency, it said, it is not FIFA's to sell. So what really happened? And why does the stake sale plan, emerging less than a week after the 2026 World Cup final, represent a crisis for football governance that makes every VAR controversy, every formal federation complaint, and every reversed red card suspension look like the buildup to something much larger? Let's go through both tracks simultaneously, the specific proposal and its implications, the institutional response and what it tells us about where world football's power structure is actually located, because both matter, and the honest examination of both is what this moment demands. Start with what the proposal actually involves, because the details matter before the reaction can be fully understood. Reports emerged in the week following the 2026 World Cup final that Infantino had been exploring the possibility of selling stakes in the World Cup to external investors, bringing third-party capital into the ownership and revenue structure of the competition. The specific terms of the proposal, the identity of the potential investors, the percentage of stakes being discussed, and the governance mechanisms that would accompany any such transaction have not been made fully public. That opacity is itself a significant part of UEFA's objection. Zero transparency as to who gains financially. That phrase from their statement is the specific accusation, not just that the plan exists, but that it exists without disclosure of who benefits from it. The commercial logic of the proposal from FIFA's perspective is not difficult to understand. The 2026 World Cup generated record revenues approaching $15 billion. The 2030 tournament, with its 6-nation hosting structure across 3 continents, will be even more expensive to organize. External investment could provide capital that reduces the financial burden on FIFA's operational budget, accelerates the development of the tournament's commercial infrastructure, and, in theory, allows the governing body to distribute more money to the national associations and development programs that form the foundation of its legitimacy. That argument is not irrational. Major sporting competitions across multiple codes have explored or implemented external investment structures. Private equity has entered professional sports leagues. Sovereign wealth funds have acquired clubs and competitions. The principle of external capital in sport is not without precedent. Here's where the argument runs out of road for football specifically, and UEFA's statement identifies precisely where the line sits. None of us are the owners of football. That sentence is the constitutional claim of European football's governing body. FIFA does not own the World Cup in the way that a commercial entity owns its intellectual property. It holds it in trust on behalf of the national associations, the confederations, the clubs, the players, the supporters and communities across the world whose engagement in the sport gives the competition its value. Without those people, without the 83,000 at the Azteca on opening night, without the 53,000 at BMO Field for Canada's first home World Cup match, without the millions watching in living rooms across every time zone, the World Cup is a broadcast schedule with no audience. FIFA does not create the value of the World Cup. Football does. The people who love it and play it and watch it do. When Gianni Infantino proposes to sell stakes in that competition, he's proposing to convert something held in trust into something owned commercially. He's proposing to place between football and its governance a layer of financial interest that belongs to people whose relationship with the sport is measured in return on investment rather than in love of the game. And he's doing so, according to UEFA's statement, without transparency as to who those people are or what they would gain.
Here's the interesting part. Because UEFA's statement arrived less than 1 week after the 2026 World Cup final, and less than 2 days after the governing body described the tournament as the greatest human event mankind has ever witnessed, the timing is not coincidental. The tournament's record revenues, approaching $15 billion, are the commercial foundation on which the stake sale proposal rests. The greater the revenue, the more valuable the stake. The more valuable the stake, the more attractive the proposal to potential investors. The 2026 World Cup's commercial success, from Infantino's perspective, demonstrates that the asset is worth selling. From UEFA's perspective, that same commercial success demonstrates how much is at risk if the asset's governance is compromised. 23 million people signed a petition calling for Argentina to be banned during the tournament. 5 national federations filed formal complaints about officiating. A 64-year rule was reversed after a confirmed phone call. The Attorney General investigations in 4 American states remain open, and now the president of the governing body that managed all of that, whose institutional response to every controversy was defended or ignored or absorbed, is proposing to sell stakes in the competition to external investors whose identities have not been disclosed. That sequence matters, not because the stake sale proposal is directly connected to any individual controversy of the 2026 tournament, but because the institutional environment it arrives in is one where trust in FIFA's governance has reached its lowest point in the modern era. The proposal to bring external investors into the World Cup's ownership structure in that environment does not arrive as a neutral commercial proposition. It arrives as the latest expression of an institutional philosophy that treats the competition as a revenue-generating asset rather than as a shared inheritance of the global game. Now here is the counterargument, because honest examination demands it. FIFA's investment in football development genuinely extends well beyond the World Cup. The prize money distributed to national associations, record sums at this tournament, flows into programs that develop the sport in countries where professional football infrastructure barely exists. The Forward Program, the Youth Development Grants, the Women's Football Investment. These are real and meaningful uses of FIFA's commercial revenues. An external investment that increased those revenues, provided it was structured with appropriate governance safeguards, could theoretically deliver more of that development funding to the parts of the football world that need it most. That argument is available. It deserves to be acknowledged, and it is precisely the argument that UEFA's statement preemptively addresses when it says the soul and governance of football are not assets to trade. The counterargument assumes that the commercial benefit flows to the right places. UEFA's response says the absence of transparency about who gains financially makes that assumption impossible to verify. Without knowing who the investors are and what returns they receive, the promise of development funding cannot be distinguished from a private financial transaction dressed in development language. The European Super League parallel is the most instructive historical comparison available. In April 2021, 12 European clubs announced the formation of a breakaway competition that would have removed football's highest level from the governance structure of UEFA and FIFA. The announcement was made without consultation with supporters, with governments, with domestic leagues, or with the football community beyond the clubs involved. The response was immediate, overwhelming, and fatal to the proposal. Within 48 hours, the project collapsed. The clubs involved faced institutional consequences, and the experience produced a formal European Commission legal case that is still working through the courts years later. What Infantino's stake sale plan has in common with the Super League proposal is not its specific structure. They are different commercial mechanisms. What they share is the underlying assumption that football's highest value competitions can be governed as commercial assets by the institutions that control them rather than a shared cultural heritage belonging to the broader sporting community. That assumption was wrong in 2021 when 12 clubs made it. UEFA's statement says it is wrong in 2026 when the president of World Football's governing body makes it. Think about what the specific phrase, "none of us are the owners of football," actually means as an institutional statement. It is UEFA saying publicly, in a formal communication, that its own authority over European football does not constitute ownership, that it holds European football in trust, not in title, that the same standard applies to FIFA's relationship with the World Cup, that the president of World Football's governing body, however significant his institutional authority, does not have the right to convert that authority into a financial transaction that creates ownership interests held by private parties whose identities have not been disclosed. That is a constitutional claim about football governance. It is the most significant thing UEFA has said about FIFA since the European Super League crisis, and it arrives less than a week after the most contested World Cup in the competition's modern history, delivered by an institution that spent 40 days watching FIFA's governance of that tournament and reaching conclusions it is now expressing with the directness of an organization that has decided the moment for careful language has passed. What do you think? Does UEFA's statement, "football is not FIFA's to sell," feel like a genuine governance reckoning? Or does Infantino's institutional support from the national associations that elect him mean this, like every previous challenge to his authority, will be absorbed without producing the structural change it demands? If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football coverage, and let me know your view in the comments. I read every one. The stake sale plan has no announced timeline. The banning investigation is open. The Umbelina investigation is unpublished. Egyptian's complaint is unanswered. And UEFA has drawn a line.